Under the silence of the early morning, the cold glow of the lights of a 24-hour laundromat was the only sign of life in Bridgeton, a quiet town. However, behind this routine scene, something unusual was happening, hidden in the shadows. Sheriff Tom Hollis, a man marked by a personal tragedy, could not shake the disturbing image of a young girl, who always appeared alone in the laundromat at night. As he delved deeper into this mystery, Tom had no idea that his investigation would lead him to a painful discovery that would change the fate of both of them. What secret did this girl keep? And how could she be the key to healing the heart of a wounded man? Before we embark on this exciting journey, leave a comment below to tell us where you are watching or listening from. And, if you are enjoying it, remember to subscribe to the channel. The city of Bridgeton, calmly resting under a starry sky, had its streets deserted, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind or the movement of a stray cat. Its residents slept soundly, windows dark and curtains drawn, as Sheriff Tom began another night of vigil. Sitting in his patrol car parked on Main Street, Tom, 53, wrapped his aging hands around a cup of coffee. His graying hair and tired blue eyes remained alert to the silence of the town. For the past 5 years, Tom had volunteered for the night shift, preferring the solitude that the darkness offered. As his colleagues returned to their families, Tom found solace in the quiet of the night hours, distancing himself from the painful memories that haunted him during the day. As he took another sip of coffee, his gaze fell on a small photograph pinned to the dashboard of his car, his wife Sarah and daughter Emily, who had lost their lives in a tragic car accident 7 years earlier. He quickly looked away, returning his attention to the deserted street ahead. The night shift was Tom's choice, because the silence and solitude suited his emotional state. There, in the darkness, he could pretend the emptiness in his heart didn't exist. In Bridgeton, a small town with little crime, most nights passed without much incident, just as Tom preferred. Tom would often cruise the city streets, checking out the few businesses that stayed open late and occasionally breaking up small problems. He would often deal with groups of teenagers, a routine that rarely required more than his presence. When the clock on the dashboard of his patrol car read 11:30 p.m., he started the engine and began his usual route, driving slowly down Main Street. The storefronts were shuttered and the windows dark. The only signs of life came from a 24-hour diner and a laundromat a few blocks away. It was as he passed the laundromat that something caught his eye. A small figure, barely visible in the dim lighting, was heading toward the entrance. Tom slowed down and squinted to see better. To his surprise, it was a girl, probably no older than 8 or 9. Black, with her hair tied in neat braids, she was wearing a faded blue jacket that was clearly too big for her, and carrying a bag full of clothes. His police instincts kicked in. What was a child doing there, alone, so late at night, especially in a laundromat? He watched as the girl disappeared into the building, the door closing behind her. For a moment, he considered going in to check, but quickly dismissed the idea. She was probably with an adult, maybe her parents were just running late. After all, it wasn't his place to intervene in every trivial situation. Even so, as he walked away, an uncomfortable feeling took hold of Tom. Something about that scene was disturbing him, bringing back memories he'd rather forget. Trying to ignore the discomfort, he forced himself to focus on the empty streets ahead, telling himself it was nothing more than a trick of his senses or a play of lights. Little did he know that that seemingly insignificant moment would be the prelude to a mystery that would change his life forever. In the following days, the patrols continued in a similar fashion. Every time he passed the laundromat, there was the girl, always alone, always at the same time and carrying the same bag full of clothes. She appeared from somewhere near the corner, making it difficult for Tom to figure out where exactly she was coming from. At first, he tried to ignore her. Maybe her parents worked nights and that was the only time they had to do the laundry, or maybe the girl just liked to help. However, as the days passed and no adults appeared by her side, his curiosity grew, and he began to pay more attention to every detail. attention adjusting his route so he would pass the laundromat more often. The girl's routine never changed. She arrived just before midnight, entered the laundromat and stayed for hours. Tom watched her through the windows, sometimes methodically sorting clothes, waiting patiently near the machines, folding each item carefully. It was on the fifth night that Tom finally admitted to himself that something wasn't right. He stopped the car across the street from the laundromat and watched the girl enter. This time he noticed details he hadn't noticed before: the way her clothes hung loosely on her small frame, the careful way she walked, as if she was trying not to draw attention to herself by the quick nervous glances she cast around before entering. Tom felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't just a child helping with the chores, this was something else entirely. But as he sat there struggling with his thoughts, he noticed a silence of voices nearby. 2 women were passing his car deep in conversation. As they passed, Tom caught snippets of what they were saying to that little girl. Again, every night like clockwork, I know. It's not right for a child to be out at this hour. Someone should do something, call social services. Or their voices faded as they walked, but their words lingered in his mind. So he wasn't the only one who noticed. The town was starting to talk, people were getting worried, and rightly so. Tom thought a child alone at night was cause for concern under any circumstances, but something kept Tom from taking immediate action. Maybe it was the memory of his own daughter and how quick judgments could sometimes do more harm than good, or maybe it was the quiet resilience he saw in the girl, the way she carried herself with a determination that seemed beyond her years. Whatever the reason, Tom knew he couldn't just walk in and start asking questions. He needed to approach this carefully to get the full picture before he acted, but he also knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was going on with this child, and as the sheriff, it was his duty to find out what. When he started the car and pulled away from the curb, Tom decided he would keep an eye on the situation, gather more information, and then decide what the best course of action was that he owed to the girl and his own conscience in dealing with this. Little did Tom know that his decision to investigate further would lead him down a path that would challenge him. Imani kept her head down, focused on the task at hand. Tom hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe the girl was just shy around strangers, or maybe her mother trusted her to do the laundry. While it wasn't the ideal situation, it didn't necessarily mean there was anything alarming going on. Deciding not to dwell on it for the moment, Tom took one last look around the laundromat. Imani was now sitting on a bench, swinging her legs as she watched the washing machine. The woman who had called her Imani seemed engrossed in a magazine she'd pulled from her purse. With a sigh, Tom headed back to the door. The cool night air enveloped him, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that he was overlooking something important. However, he had no proof that anything was wrong, just that nagging feeling in the back of his mind. As he walked back to the cruiser, his eyes fell on the photo on the dashboard. Emily's smiling face stared back at him, and for a moment, he imagined Imani's face superimposed on his daughter's. They were both young and vulnerable, each in her own way. As Tom started the engine, his mind began to race even faster. He had hoped that this visit had eased his worries, but in fact, it had only intensified them. As he pulled away from the curb, he mentally resolved that he would keep a close eye on the laundromat for the next few nights. Something told him that the mystery surrounding Imani was far from solved. The police car's headlights cut through the darkness as Tom drove away, his mind whirling with conflicting thoughts. He had gone in there looking for answers, but he left with more questions than ever. As he turned onto Main Street, he found himself staring in the rearview mirror, watching the laundromat sign shrink in the distance. Something about this situation just didn't feel right. Yes, he had seen another woman, someone who clearly knew Imani, but did that explain a child doing laundry alone so late at night? With his hands firmly on the steering wheel, Tom felt doubt gnaw at him. What if he was wrong? What if Imani really was in danger and he had simply driven away? The thought made his stomach churn. Tom pulled over to the side of the road, his breathing quickening as anxiety consumed him. He had been quick to assume everything was fine, but what if it wasn't? What if Imani needed help, and he, the town sheriff, hadn't done enough. Closing his eyes, he tried to calm his racing heart. Imani's reserved demeanor came back to him, especially the way she'd walked away from him. Was that just shyness, or was there something more serious going on? And the woman who'd come in, she'd greeted Imani, yes, but had there been any real warmth in that interaction? Any evidence that she was actually caring for the girl? The more Tom thought about it, the more he realized how little he really knew. He'd drawn conclusions based on a brief observation, and now he was second-guessing everything. What kind of sheriff would he be if he didn't thoroughly investigate a possible child endangerment case? Opening his eyes, he stared at the deserted street in front of him. He couldn't ignore this. He had to make sure Imani was safe. If he was wrong and everything was fine, at least he would have peace of mind. But if he was right and the girl was in danger, he would never forgive himself for not taking action. Tom made up his mind, starting the car again and driving to the police station. It was time to start a real investigation. The next morning, Tom was at his desk, surrounded by papers, his computer screen full of tabs open. He had spent most of the night combing through records, trying to find any information about Imani or her family. But as the sun rose, illuminating his cluttered desk, he had to admit that there was nothing. No record of a child named Imani matching his description, not in the school system, not at any listed address. It was as if the girl didn't officially exist. Frustration gnawed at Tom as he rubbed his tired eyes. How was it possible that a child could be so under the radar in a small town like Bridgeton, where he thought he knew almost everyone? Determined not to give up, Tom decided to adopt another strategy. If the official records didn't provide any answers, perhaps the townspeople could. Over the next few days, he would spend time talking to residents, especially those who lived near the laundromat or frequented it regularly. The responses he received were varied. Some people remembered seeing Imani. Some people expressed concern at seeing such a young child out so late, while others shrugged it off, assuming she was with her family. But no one knew for sure who she was or where she had come from. One conversation in particular stuck in Tom's mind. It was with Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment above the laundromat. She reported seeing Imani on the night in question. The poor thing looked so exhausted, Mrs. Johnson said, her face etched with concern. I offered her a cookie, but she just shook her head and went back to folding her clothes. That's not right, Sheriff. A child that age should be home sleeping, not doing laundry at midnight. Tom couldn't help but agree. As the days passed, his uneasiness about Imani only grew. He found himself driving by the laundromat more and more often, hoping to find her and make sure she was safe. But Imani remained a mystery. She would appear every night, silent and efficient, handling the clothes, and then disappear into the darkness. It was never clear where she came from or where she was going. It was as if she existed only within that space, the confines of the laundry room. As the days turned into weeks, Tom felt a growing responsibility toward the girl. Something about her touched him deeply. Perhaps it was the memory of his own daughter, or perhaps it was his protective instinct. Either way, he knew he could not ignore this situation. The enigma of Imani had become more than a simple case, it had become a personal mission that filled the void in his life. For the first time in years, he felt truly motivated by something beyond his routine rounds. But this new purpose also carried an immense weight. If Imani was indeed in danger, each day without his action could mean greater risk to her. This thought kept him awake at night, even disturbing his dreams. On one of those nights, once again he found himself standing in front of the laundry room. It was past midnight, and Imani was inside, as usual, folding clothes and organizing them with precision. As he watched the small figure, a lump formed in his throat. There was something familiar about the scene, a painful memory of his own daughter, Emily, helping her mother with the laundry on Saturday mornings. That memory, which normally saddened him, now enveloped him with a bittersweet warmth. Looking at Imani through the window, Tom made a decision. He could put it off no longer. Whatever was happening to this child, he had to find out. He owed it to Imani as much as he owed it to his own peace of mind. Taking a deep breath, he got out of the car and walked toward the laundromat, determined to solve the mystery. He knew he had to try, had to reach Imani somehow, offer whatever help he could. As he reached for the doorknob, Tom silently promised himself and the girl that he wouldn't give up until he understood what was happening. Little did he know that this truth would change everything, profoundly affecting both of their lives. The familiar bell on the laundry room door rang as Tom entered, and the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a glow over the washer and dryer. Imani was in her usual corner, carefully folding a faded t-shirt. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hi, Imani," he said softly when he was a few feet away. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and fear. She took a small step back, clutching the t-shirt to her chest as if it were a shield. "It's okay," Tom said, kneeling down at her level. "I'm not here to bother you, I just want to know you're okay." Imani didn't answer, but she didn't run away either. She just watched, exhausted and alert, ready to run at any moment. Tom's heart sank as he realized how hard that child's life must have been. He was about to speak again when something caught his eye. Imani's backpack, open on the bench behind her, revealed clothes, a small blanket, and a well-worn stuffed animal. Before he could process what she was seeing, Imani acted quickly. She grabbed her backpack, threw the folded clothes inside, and hurried past Tom toward the door. "Imani, wait!" Tom yelled, but it was too late. The door slammed shut with the sound of the bell echoing through the empty laundry room. He ran outside, his eyes scanning the dark street. He caught just a glimpse of Imani disappearing around the corner. Without hesitation, he took off after her. The chase took him through the quiet streets of Bridgeton, his heart pounding as he tried not to lose sight of her. She was surprisingly agile for a child, weaving between parked cars and alleys. As they neared the edge of town, Tom realized where they were going. The old cemetery loomed ahead, its iron gate ajar, a dark silhouette in the night. Imani slipped through a gap in the fence, disappearing into the shadows of the tombstones. Tom hesitated for a moment. The cemetery at night was a maze of darkness, full of hidden obstacles. If he wasn't careful, he could lose sight of Imani or get hurt. But the thought of leaving her alone in this place spurred him on. Taking a deep breath, he slipped through the gap in the fence and into the cemetery. Darkness seemed to envelop everything around him as he walked among the graves. The moon, almost obscured by clouds, offered little light. Tom strained his eyes and listened for any sound. He called out, his voice high and strange in the silence of the night, "Imani, please, I just want to help." But there was no answer. Tom walked deeper into the cemetery, stumbling over hidden roots and getting his uniform caught on low-hanging branches. With each step, his anxiety grew. How could such a small child disappear like that? What seemed like an eternity was actually a time in which he searched every shadowy corner, checked behind large headstones, and explored every possible shadow, but there was no sign of Imani. It was as if the cemetery itself had swallowed her. Exhausted and frustrated, Tom finally accepted that the search had failed. He walked back to the entrance, his mind flooded with dark thoughts. What if Imani was hurt? What if someone found her before he could? As he stepped back through the gap in the fence, a sense of defeat overcame him. He had been so close, he had almost managed to help her, but now she was missing, perhaps in an even more dangerous situation. Back in the patrol car, Tom felt the weight of his failure on his shoulders, but as he got behind the wheel, he made a silent promise: this would not end there. He would find Imani, no matter what the cost. He wouldn't rest until he was certain she was safe. With one last look at the darkened cemetery, he started the car and headed toward the city. Tomorrow, he vowed, he would intensify his search and not let any detail slip through the cracks. What he didn't know yet was that the answers were closer than he thought. The answers he had been searching for were closer than he had imagined, and the truth would be far more painful than he could have anticipated. The next night, Tom returned to the laundromat, his eyes fixed on the entrance. He had arrived early, determined not to lose Imani if she showed up. The events of the previous night still haunted him, a mix of worry and determination consuming him. As the hours passed, his anxiety grew. What if she didn't come? What if his actions had driven her away forever? The thought made his stomach churn with guilt. Just as he was about to give up hope, a small figure appeared around the corner. Tom's heart raced as he recognized Imani, her backpack slung over her shoulder. She glanced around cautiously before entering the laundromat. Tom watched through the window as she went about her routine, but something was different. Her movements seemed slower, hesitant. His heart sank when he saw her like this. He wanted to go in and make sure everything was okay, but he knew he had to be careful, he couldn't scare her again. So he waited, as the laundromat gradually emptied. By midnight, Imani was the only one inside. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Tom got out of the car and approached the door, which he slowly opened, the sound of the familiar chime announcing his presence. Imani's head jerked up, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. Before she could try to run, Tom held up his hands in a pacifying gesture. "It's okay, Imani," he said softly. "I didn't come to hurt you or take you, I just want to talk. Are you okay?" Imani hesitated, her body tense, as if ready to bolt at any moment, but after a long moment, she nodded slightly. Tom let out a sigh, realizing how long he had been holding his breath. Cautiously, he approached, and as he got closer, he noticed something that worried him. Imani's eyes were red and puffy, as if she had been crying. "Imani," Tom said gently, bending down to her level. "I'm worried about you. Why do you stay here all alone every night?" Imani's lower lip began to tremble, but she remained silent. Tom was about to insist when he noticed something else. Imani's eyelids were heavy, her small body swaying slightly. She looked exhausted. And then, before his eyes, her legs gave way. She sank down onto the nearby bench, her eyes slowly closing despite her efforts to stay awake. Tom stood in stunned silence as Imani curled up on the bench, using her backpack as a makeshift pillow. Within seconds, she was fast asleep, her breathing even and rhythmic. The scene hit Tom like a blow to the chest. Imani wasn't just a child doing laundry late at night, but someone who clearly had nowhere else to go, a child using the laundromat as a refuge. Tears of exhaustion and sadness welled in Tom's eyes as the harsh reality of Imani's situation finally dawned on him. How long had she lived like this? How had he not realized it before? As he watched Imani sleep soundly, memories of his own daughter, Emily, flooded his mind. He remembered how small and helpless she had been when she slept, all the times he and Sarah had tucked her into bed, kissed her goodnight, made sure she felt loved and protected. And now, here was Imani, another little girl, asleep on a hard bench in a laundromat because there was no better place for her. Tom couldn't hold back the tears. For the first time in years, he cried silently, sitting on the floor next to the bench, watching over Imani as she rested. In that moment, he made a promise to himself: he would help this child. He would make sure she never had to spend another night alone in a laundromat again. Imani deserved safety, affection, and a decent life. Though he didn't yet know how he would do that, Tom decided he would do whatever he could to make things right, both for Imani's sake and for the sake of his own family's memory. As the night wore on, Tom remained vigilant, though his heart was heavy with the revelation. As the first rays of sunlight began to shine through the windows of the laundromat, Imani woke up. Tom, who had been dozing on the floor, woke up immediately. He watched her eyes slowly open, confusion written all over her face as she looked around. When her eyes landed on Tom, she started and quickly sat up, hugging her backpack to her chest. "It's okay, Imani," Tom said, his voice soft and husky from the long night. "You're safe. I won't hurt you." Imani didn't answer, but she didn't try to run away either. She just sat there, watching Tom warily, her body tense, ready to run at any moment. Tom took a deep breath, aware that his next words could be decisive. "Imani," he began gently. "I know you're scared, and I understand. But I want you to know that you don't have to be afraid of me. I'm here to help." Imani's grip on her backpack relaxed a little, but she still remained silent. Tom seized the moment. "Can you tell me why you're sleeping here?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "Where are your parents?" At the mention of her parents, Imani's lower lip trembled. For a moment, Tom thought she was going to start crying, but then, in a voice so low he could barely hear her, she answered. "She left. She got sick, very sick, and she never woke up." Tom's heart broke again at that. "Oh, Imani," he whispered, sadness taking over. "I'm so sorry. What about your father, or any other relatives?" he asked, trying not to sound intrusive. Imani shook her head slowly. "It was just me and Mom. We came here to find a better life." Imani's voice trailed off as her eyes filled with tears. Tom had to hold back his emotions as the pieces of the story began to fall into place, revealing a story of loss and suffering. "How long have you been in this situation?" he asked softly. Imani shrugged. "I don't know, a long time." Tom nodded, his mind racing, trying to understand how this little girl had managed to survive alone for so long. How had no one, including him, noticed? "Imani," he said, leaning toward her slightly. "What you've been through is more than any child should ever have to face, but I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. I'm here to help you. Will you let me do that?" For the first time, Imani really looked at him. Her dark eyes explored Tom's face, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why do you want to help me?" The question took him by surprise. For a moment, he didn't know what to say, but as he looked into her eyes, he realized he had to be honest. "Because a long time ago, I had a little girl too," he said softly. "Her name was Emily. And if she was ever in trouble, I'd want someone to help her, just like I want to help you." Something changed in Imani's face. The fear in her eyes gave way to a faint glimmer of hope, so subtle it almost went unnoticed, but it was there. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked in a whisper. Tom, still uncertain, reached out slowly, giving Imani a chance to pull away, but when she didn't, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "First, let's get some breakfast," he said with a smile. "Then we'll go to the police station to make sure you're safe and taken care of. What do you think?" Imani hesitated for a brief moment before giving a small nod. "Okay," he whispered. Tom felt a wave of relief. It was a small step, but an important one. "Okay," he repeated, offering her a warm smile. As they both stood, Imani grabbed her backpack, and Tom led her outside. Despite the difficulties he knew lay ahead, the questions, the paperwork, the decisions, he had now accomplished what he had set out to do, earn Imani's trust. On the way to the police station, silence reigned. Imani sat in the back seat, clutching her backpack tightly to her chest. Tom watched her in the rearview mirror, still processing the events that had led them there. As they pulled into the parking lot, he noticed Imani's body tense up again. "It's going to be okay," he reassured her as he turned off the car. "We're just going to talk and figure out how to help you. Nothing bad will happen, I promise." Imani gave a small nod, but her eyes still showed apprehension as they entered the police building. The place was quiet at this early hour, with only a few officers starting their shifts. Tom led Imani to his office, closing the door behind him for privacy. "You can sit down," he said gently, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Imani sat on the edge, still holding her backpack against her body as if it were a shield. Tom, in turn, took a few moments to gather his thoughts. He knew he needed more information, but he also didn't want to overwhelm her. "Imani," he began carefully, "can you tell me a little more about what happened to your mother, when she got sick?" Imani looked down at the floor, fiddling with the clasps on her backpack. It was a long time ago, she said quietly. We came from Haiti. Mom said we would have a better life here, but then she started coughing a lot and couldn't work anymore. Tom nodded, encouraging her to continue, feeling the weight of each word. And what happened after that? We lost our apartment, she continued, barely above a whisper. We stayed in shelters for a while, but then Mom got worse, they took her to the hospital, and she never came back. The lump in Tom's throat tightened. I'm so sorry, Imani. That must have been really hard. What did you do after that? She shrugged. I didn't know what to do. Mom always said that if they found out about us, they could send us back. I was scared. Imani hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. So. I stayed away. I found places to sleep. The laundry room was warm at night. Tom listened intently to every word, his heart heavy. The childlike simplicity with which she described her struggle only made it all the more painful. Despite her difficulty in expressing herself, the fear and desperation behind her story was clear. You were very brave, Imani, Tom said, his voice breaking. But now you're not alone anymore. We're here to help you. Imani stared at him with wide, almost disbelieving eyes. Promise, she whispered. Tom nodded firmly, trying to control his emotion. I promise. Just then, a knock interrupted their conversation. Tom called for them to come in, and a well-dressed woman entered the office. I'm Monica Dawson from Child Protective Services. We received your call about a child who needs help. Tom stood to greet her, then turned to Imani. This is Ms. Dawson. She's here to help us figure out what to do next. Is it okay if she asks you a few questions? Imani nodded hesitantly, looking from Tom to the woman. As Ms. Dawson sat down and began to talk to Imani, Tom watched intently. At first, the girl gave short, guarded answers, but she gradually opened up, especially when Dawson asked about her life before coming to the United States. Tom felt a mix of emotions as he listened to Imani speak fondly of her mother and their dreams of a better life. The pain in her voice when she mentioned the loss was palpable. As the conversation progressed, Tom found himself increasingly invested in Imani's future. The idea of her being placed in a system where she might be forgotten bothered him deeply. She needed stability, affection, and a home, things that had been denied her too early. As Miss Dawson explained the next steps to Imani, Tom had a moment of clarity. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Miss Dawson, he interrupted politely. Before we go any further, I'd like to speak with you privately, if possible. Miss Dawson looked surprised. It was a quiet morning, with only a few officers starting their shifts. Tom led Imani into his office, closing the door behind them to ensure some privacy. Sit down, he said gently, motioning to a chair across from his desk. Imani sat on the edge, clutching her backpack like a shield. Tom settled back in his chair, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He knew he needed more information, but he didn't want to overwhelm her. Imani, he began softly, can you tell me more about what happened to your mother when she got sick? Imani's eyes dropped to the floor, and her hands began fidgeting nervously with the straps of her backpack. It was a long time ago, she whispered. We came from Haiti. Mom said we would have a better life, but she started coughing and couldn't work anymore. Tom nodded encouragingly, feeling the weight of Imani's words on his heart. And after that, he asked, his voice low. We lost our apartment, Imani continued, barely a whisper. We stayed in shelters, but Mom got really sick and they took her to the hospital. She never came back. Tom felt a lump in his throat. I'm so sorry, Imani. It must have been really hard, he said. What did you do after that? Imani shrugged. I didn't know what to do, she confessed hesitantly. Mom always said they could send us back if they found out, so I hid. I found places to sleep, the laundry room was warm at night. Tom listened to every word with a heavy heart, deeply touched by the simplicity with which Imani told her story. Despite her youth and the few words, the fear and loneliness she had faced were clear. "You were very brave," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But now you don't have to be alone anymore. We're here for you." Imani looked at him with her big, dark eyes, uncertain. "Promise?" she asked in a barely audible whisper. "I promise," Tom replied firmly, feeling the emotion in his throat. Just then, a soft knock interrupted the moment. As he opened the door, an elegantly dressed woman entered. "I'm Monica Dawson from Child Protective Services. We got your call about a little girl who needed help." Tom stood to greet her and, turning to Imani, said, "This is Ms. Dawson. She's here to help us find the best path forward. Is it okay if she asks a few questions?" Imani nodded hesitantly, her eyes darting from Tom to Ms. Dawson. As the social worker began to ask questions, Tom watched, noticing Imani's initial reluctance to speak. However, as the conversation progressed, she began to open up more, especially when she talked about her life before coming to the United States. Tom felt a mix of emotions as he listened to Imani talk about her mother, the love evident in her words and the sadness of her loss. As the interview continued, Tom found himself becoming more invested in Imani's future. The thought of seeing her in the system, possibly forgotten, was unbearable. She needed stability, love, and care. At that moment, a clear idea flashed through his mind. He knew what he needed to do. "Miss Dawson," he interrupted politely, "there is something I would like to discuss with you, in private." Surprised, the social worker nodded. "Of course." Tom took a deep breath as he followed her out of the office. What he was about to propose was a big change, but he was certain it was the right thing to do. "I would like to apply to be Imani's foster parent, with the intention of formally adopting her if possible." Miss Dawson looked surprised. "Sheriff Hollis, this is a big decision. Are you sure?" "I am," Tom replied firmly. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life. I don't know how to explain it, but I need to give this girl a home." She studied him for a moment before smiling. "This isn't a typical situation, but I can see how much you care about Imani. If you're serious, we can start the process right away. It won't be easy, there will be a lot of paperwork and home visits." "I'm prepared for whatever it takes," Tom replied firmly. "Imani deserves a family." Miss Dawson nodded, and they walked back into the office. Tom, his heart pounding, crouched down beside Imani. "Imani," he said softly, "how would you feel about living with me? Not just for a while, maybe forever." Imani's eyes widened in surprise. Do you want me?" she whispered. Tom felt his eyes well up. "Yes, Imani. I want you to be part of my family." A shy smile formed on Imani's face, the first real smile Tom had ever seen, and in that instant he knew that both of their lives were about to change forever. Before Tom could process the warmth that spread through his chest at Imani's words, he felt the urge to hug her, to shield her from any more pain. But he knew it was important to let her open up and express her feelings so he could move forward on his journey. "You're doing great, Imani," he said softly. "I'm here for you." Sarah turned to the girl with a gentle smile. "Can you tell me how things have changed since you started living with the sheriff?" Imani's face lit up a little. "I'm not scared all the time anymore," she said softly. "And now I have a real bed. The sheriff even gave me a blanket with butterflies on it." Tom felt his chest tighten, touched by the simplicity of Imani's joy. Something as basic as a blanket held so much meaning for her. "That sounds lovely," Sarah commented warmly. "And what else do you like about being with the sheriff?" Imani thought for a moment. "He makes pancakes on Saturdays," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "And he reads me bedtime stories, even when he's tired from work." Tom hadn't realized how much these seemingly simple gestures meant to Imani. He mentally promised himself that he would continue the Saturday pancake tradition. "It sounds like you and Sheriff Tom have a really nice routine," Sarah observed. "How does that make you feel?" Imani frowned as she considered her answer. "Safe," she said finally, and then added, "and happy. I didn't think I could ever be happy again." Her voice grew distant, her eyes lost in painful memories. "It's okay," Tom said softly, placing a hand on Imani's shoulder. "You don't have to talk about anything you're not ready for." Sarah nodded. "That's right, Imani. We can focus on the present. By the way, what excites you most about the possibility of living with Sheriff Tom permanently?" Imani's eyes lit up with excitement. "Let's paint my room," she said excitedly. "Sheriff Tom said I can choose any color I want. I think I'll choose yellow, like the sun." As Imani continued to talk about her hopes for the future, Tom felt a surge of gratitude as he watched her gradually come out of her shell. Hearing her speak so enthusiastically about a simple but hopeful future was more than he could have imagined when he first met her in that laundromat. "Imani," Sarah said as the conversation drew to a close, "you've been incredibly brave. But you know you don't have to face everything alone, right?" Imani nodded, the smile still on her face. Tom knew that this moment marked the beginning of something new and promising for both of them. Sheriff Hollis was there to give Imani something she had always wanted, a permanent home. The girl looked up at Tom with a gleam of hope in her eyes. "Really?" she asked, her voice low but filled with a deep longing. "Do you really want me to stay forever?" Tom felt his eyes well up as he knelt in front of her, holding her small hands. "Yes, Imani," he said firmly. "I want you to be part of my family. I know I can never replace your mother, and I wouldn't even try, but I promise to love you, protect you, and give you the home and life you deserve." For a moment, Imani watched him silently, her eyes searching for any sign of deceit. Slowly, she nodded and whispered, I would like that." Tom's heart swelled with joy. He exchanged a look with Sarah, who was watching the scene with a smile. "What now?" he asked, determined. "What do we need to do to make this official?" Sarah's smile widened. "Well, Sheriff, there's still some paperwork to fill out and a few home visits to make, but based on what I've seen today, I believe we're on the right track. Imani needs stability, love, and understanding, all of which you seem more than capable of providing." As they discussed their next steps, Tom felt a sense of purpose stir within him that he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked at Imani, this brave little girl who had been through so much. He knew he would do whatever it took to give her the life she deserved. Challenges would certainly come, but when he saw the hope blossom in her eyes, Tom knew it would all be worth it. This was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, a chance to heal, grow, and build a family. In the months that followed, Tom threw himself fully into the process of becoming Imani's legal guardian. There was a lot of paperwork, interviews, and home visits to navigate, but he never wavered in his commitment. Meanwhile, Imani slowly began to open up, her previously reserved demeanor giving way to glimpses of the curious, intelligent girl she once was. There were difficult moments, like nightmares that would wake her up screaming or moments of uncertainty that would make her shut down, but with each passing day, Tom saw her trust a little more, believing that this new life was real and lasting. One afternoon, as they sat on Tom's porch, now their home, Imani looked at him seriously. "Sheriff Tom," she began, still using the title in moments of hesitation. "Are you sure you want to keep me forever?" Tom's heart sank at the vulnerability in her voice. He knelt down again, facing her. "Imani," he said firmly, "I've never been so sure of anything in my life. You're my family now, and that's forever, no matter what." Imani's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were of joy. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I love you, Dad." The word "Dad" was still new and precious on her lips. Tom hugged her back, his eyes welling up with tears. I love you too, honey, more than you know. The big day of the adoption hearing finally arrived. Tom stood in the courtroom, holding Imani's hand tightly as the judge reviewed the case. He was barely breathing with tension, waiting for the moment that would make their new family official. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, the judge smiled slightly and said, "I am pleased to approve this adoption. Congratulations, Sheriff Hollis and Imani, you are now officially father and daughter in the eyes of the law." The courtroom erupted in applause as Tom picked Imani up, both laughing and crying at the same time. It was done, they were a family. As they walked out of the courtroom into the bright sunlight, Tom looked at his daughter, who was smiling, her eyes full of hope and happiness. "So, Imani Hollis," he said, his heart overflowing with love, "how should we celebrate?" Imani thought for a moment, then smiled. "Can we go to the laundromat?" she asked. Tom raised an eyebrow in surprise. "The laundromat? Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's where you found me," she said softly. "Where our family began. I want to remember this place, but now as something happy." Once again, Tom felt tears welling up. Unable to speak, he just nodded, and together, hand in hand, they walked to the laundromat. The place looked different in the daylight. The fluorescent lights seemed softer with the sunlight streaming through the windows, and the hum of the machine sounded more cheerful. Imani led him to the bench where he had found her sleeping months ago. They sat together, silent, both of them lost in their memories. "You know," Tom said softly, "I used to think this place only brought back sad memories, but now I think it's a symbol of hope. This is where our story began." Imani leaned against him. "It was scary before," she admitted, "but now it's special. Sile, because that's where I met you." Tom put his arm around her shoulders, holding her tenderly. As they stood there, he reflected on how far they had come and how much more they still had to build together. Tom remembered the shy, scared little girl he had met there, now transformed into his daughter. Although she was still reserved at times, Imani was becoming more confident and happy with each passing day. Over the next few weeks, Tom noticed a change in himself as well. The weight of grief he had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by moments of joy as he laughed at Imani's jokes and felt a growing anticipation for each new day. One sunny morning, as Imani was getting ready for school, Tom made an important decision. "Imani," he said over breakfast, "how would you feel about accompanying me to the cemetery this weekend? There's someone I'd like you to meet." Curious, Imani asked who it was, and Tom took a deep breath before answering, "My first daughter, Emily, and my wife, Sarah. I think it's time I introduced them to you." Imani's eyes widened, but she nodded seriously and said softly, "Can I bring you flowers?" On Saturday, the two of them stood hand in front of two well-tended graves. Though Tom felt the familiar pain tighten in his chest, the warmth of Imani's hand on his side brought comfort. "Sarah, Emily," he said, his voice breaking, "this is Imani. She's our daughter now. I'm sure you would have loved her." Imani stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of flowers on each grave. "Hi," she whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you, but I promise I'll take good care of Daddy. We'll take care of each other." Tears streamed down Tom's face, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. As they walked back to the car, a sense of peace washed over him, a calm he hadn't experienced in years. The past and the present were finally in harmony, and he felt ready to face the future with hope. Over time, they had developed their own routines and traditions. Every Saturday, they would visit the laundromat, not because they had to, since Tom's house had a washer and dryer, but because it had become special to them, a symbol of where it all began. On one of those Saturdays, as they watched the machines whirring away, Imani looked at Tom thoughtfully. "Dad," she said, the word still warmed Tom's heart every time he heard it, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night?" Tom put his arm around her, pulling her closer. "I think about it every day," he admitted, "and I'm grateful every day that I found you." You've brought so much happiness into my life, Imani. I hope you know that. She smiled and snuggled closer. You saved me, she said simply. Tom shook his head, feeling the tears well up again. No, honey, we saved each other. As the sun painted the sky in pink hues, Tom reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the lonely nights of the past to the joyful days of the present, from the scared little girl in the laundromat to the amazing young woman by his side. Life had taken them on a difficult path, full of loss and challenges, but it had also brought them together, allowing them to build a family. In the end, this wasn't just about a sheriff figuring out why a little girl was alone in a laundromat at night. It was about two lost souls finding each other, about healing, hope, and the incredible power of love to transform lives. Thank you for following this heartwarming journey of an unexpected family and a new chance at happiness. If Tom and Imani's story touched your heart as much as it did ours, click here to watch another heartwarming story that we're sure you'll love too.